Making sure all my buttons are set. Okay. Well, hello, my name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. And this is an online program today, one of our weekly programs that we launched to focus on a particular object in our exhibition while our museum is closed. And I hope all of you out there are staying safe and healthy, and I'm grateful for your support during these difficult times. Before I start, let me encourage you, as always, to pose any questions you have by clicking on the Q&A button, which you should be able to find by scrolling along the bottom or top of your screen, depending on the hardware you're using. But if you type in some questions that come up, I'll be happy to respond either during my talk or at the end. Okay, so you were just listening, for those of you who were on a little early, to a 1930s recording of Gene Merrymaker's band, which included a musician named Max Goodman. And they were performing a tune called High Society. I'm going to talk more about Max Goodman in a couple of minutes, so I thought that it made sense to play some of his music up front. Today, I want to focus on this document. It is a letter in our first gallery that encourages a Jewish emigre back in 1941 to purchase a steamship ticket for travel from Belgium to the United States. And the letter was given to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center by Suzanne Germain, and we're very grateful for her donation to our collection. Here's the letter as it's displayed in our gallery with passports and other immigration documents. Perhaps these kinds of papers and letters are not the most exciting thing to see in an exhibition, and yet the issues connected to these papers are important to understanding why it was so hard for Jews to get out of Europe in the 1930s and 40s and to escape from the Holocaust. Let's look closely at the letter. As you can see, the letter is sent from the US State Department's Foreign Service, but in particular from the Consulate General in Antwerp, that's in Belgium, and it's sent on June 10th of 1941 to a John Barron in Brooklyn. The date and the location are noteworthy. You may recall, of course, that the Nazis attacked Poland on September 1st, 1939, and focused their initial military efforts to the east. Belgium chose to remain neutral after the German attack on Poland at the outbreak of the war. But on May 10th, 1940, Germany turned its attention to the west, attacking the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The speed of the Nazi attack was unprecedented. The Netherlands surrendered after just 5 days, and Belgium didn't hold out much longer, with King Leopold surrendering after only 18 days on May 28th, notably without any consultation with his own government. With Belgium and the Netherlands taken care of, the Nazis went on to the larger goal of capturing France, which surrendered less than a month later on June 22nd, 1940. By the end of 1940, the map of Europe had been redrawn and looked like this, with the Nazis and their allies controlling almost the entire continent. That remained the picture when our letter was written. So Belgium was occupied by Nazi Germany, but America still operated a consulate there. Remember, this was before the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and so America and Germany were not yet at war in June of 1941. Indeed, American consulates in Nazi-controlled Europe had been handling a deluge of visas, or visa applications, particularly from Jews, dating back to 1933 when Hitler came to power. However, America had established a series of quota laws back in the 1920s that severely limited immigration. This famous political cartoon gives you a sense of the new restrictions, and on the right you can see how they evolved during the 1920s. By the 1930s, Based on the 1924 National Origins Act and an executive order from President Hoover in 1929, America was only accepting 25,957 immigrants from Germany in any given year, down from over 50,000 5 years earlier, and down from 67,000 in 1921. Of course, Germany's quota remained far higher than many of the other countries. Poland, by comparison, as you can see, had its quota cut from 30,000 in 1921 to only 6,500 in 1929. The quotas, however, were only part of the story. Given concerns about the Depression in the United States, along with anti-Semitism and a general anti-immigrant sentiment, the State Department in the United States did not see quotas as a goal, but as a cap. This was not because, between 1933 and 1940, over 83,000 German quota slots that could have been used went unfilled. This was not because of a lack of Germans trying to come to the United States. By 1937, there were more than 88,000 Germans on the American waiting list for visas. And by 1940, the waiting list had grown to over 300,000. I know this is a somewhat confusing and small printed slide, but you can see that it shows immigration figures for different years. In each of the years, the top line of figures represents the available quota slots from Germany. The filled-in figures represent the slots that were actually used, and the empty figures, the quota slots that went unused. Below the top line is a representation of the growing waiting list for Americans' visas from Germany. And even if the words are too small to read, I hope you can get a sense of many of the unused quota spaces and the growing waiting list for Germans coming to America or seeking to come. The real reason that the quota slots went unused was because of bureaucratic hurdles that were put up by both Germany and America. And I'll come back to those hurdles. One more important thing to remember here is that in the period from 1933 until the end of 1941, Germany had not yet embraced the plan to murder all the Jews of Europe. That goal came together at the end of 1941 with final plans of wide-scale implementation confirmed at the Wannsee Conference on January 20th, 1942. Instead, the plan, even as late as June 1941, when our letter was written, was expulsion and emigration, not genocide. In fact, the Nazis initially encouraged emigration of Jews in the mid-1930s. But by 1938, Nazi policies sought to make sure that any Jew who left Germany was unable to take any of their money with them. The Nazis initially imposed a 25% flight tax, but by early 1938, they'd added currency and exchange regulations that limited the amount taken out of the country to only 10% of any immigrant's assets. And in June of 1938, Germany prohibited any capital from leaving with immigrants. Let me go back to the letter. As the war expanded in Europe, American politicians and diplomats grew increasingly concerned about visa applicants. Indeed, 5 days before this letter was written, on June 5th, 1941, the State Department cautioned diplomats abroad, like those in Antwerp, that visas would soon be denied to applicants with close relatives remaining in German-occupied countries. American officials, American officials were concerned that unfriendly governments would use family members as hostages or bargaining chips to coerce immigrants to commit acts of sabotage or espionage. But this letter suggests that the new policy had not yet gone into effect when it was written on June 10th. I said before that the letter was sent from the American consulate in Antwerp to John Barron. But the letter is not about John Barron. The letter is about a Belgian woman named Sabina Ghitman, who you can see here in the upper portion I've highlighted, who was trying to get to the United States. The letter confirms receipt of an affidavit of support, along with some supporting documents, that John Barron had sent on behalf of Sabina Ghitman. And it goes on to say that Barron's affidavit and the supporting documents are, quote, sufficient and satisfactory to enable the applicant to establish that she is not excludable as a person likely to become a public charge. One of the long-standing concerns about immigration in the 1920s and 30s, and even today, was that immigrants be able to support themselves or have family that can support them. Becoming a public charge or relying on the US government for financial support could be reason for exclusion. But this letter reports the good news for Sabina Ghitman, that she has been passed through this hurdle, she's gotten through that hurdle, thanks to John Barron's support. John Barron was not a blood relative of Sabina Ghitman, but they were connected through marriage. John Barron's daughter, Née Barron, had fallen in love in 1937 with a musician who had recently moved to New York from Germany named Max Goodman, the same Goodman whose music you heard at the opening of this program. Sabina Ghitman was Max Goodman's sister. So Max's father-in-law, John Barron, was working in 1941 to help Max's sister, Sabina Ghitman, get out of Nazi-controlled Europe. In the 1930s, Max was a well-known jazz musician in Europe, but he'd actually been born in New York in 1907 during a short window of time when his German parents had moved to New York before deciding that America was not their cup of tea and returning to Germany. Goodman was the anglicized version of the German last name Ghitman. The fact that Max had an American passport, because he was born in the United States, meant that in 1937, he had been able to get out of Nazi Germany and move to America. The family story is that in 1937, while Max Goodman was performing in Holland, his mother called him and said that she had heard he was going to be targeted when he came back to Germany because he was a member of a Jewish soccer team. He took the hint and was able, with his US passport, to come to the United States. His brother, although not born in America, was also able to get out of Nazi Germany when his non-Jewish boss sent him to Brazil for a business trip and told him it would be dangerous for him to come back and it would be better for him to stay in Brazil, which he did. One of Max's sisters, Sabina, also got out of Germany, but only as far as Belgium. And by 1940, she found herself back under Nazi rule as the Nazis swept in and through Belgium. Max's other sister, Berta, and his parents stayed in Germany. We actually have a photograph of both Max Goodman and Sabina Ghitman elsewhere in our exhibition. This is a photo of Max Goodman's band. Max is the gentleman on the right-hand side, second from the right. And here is Sabina as a little girl well before the war. You know, actually, I want to take this chime. I don't have the date of when this photo of Sabina Ghitman was taken, so I'm going to draw on your knowledge as some crowdsourcing here. And I would be grateful if you would type into the Q&A what you think her age was when this photo was taken. That way, maybe I can get a sense of it from the general response from all of you. So how old do you think Sabina Ghitman is in this photo? Thank you very much for your help. By the time our letter was written in 1941, Sabina was no longer a little girl. She was 28 years old and had been in Belgium for a couple of years. After the fall of France in June of 1940, she had started working from Belgium with the French resistance, but she still wanted to get out of Europe. Okay, back to the letter. After saying that John Barron's affidavit of support removed any concerns about Sabina Ghitman becoming a public charge, the letter continues with what appears to be more good news. It says, since, quote, steamship reservations are difficult, if not impossible, to obtain, it has been suggested to the above-mentioned applicant that she should take immediate steps towards obtaining a definite reservation on a specified steamship for a scheduled sailing. This is news that anybody would have wanted to hear, an encouragement to get a steamship ticket. It seemed like she was getting the green light, that she was getting the approval to depart. However, there's more in the letter that hints at difficulties. Not only does it say that steamship reservations are difficult, if not impossible, to obtain, but the letter also points out some timing issues. The letter says visas may not be issued for periods exceeding 4 months. So if Sabina was given a visa and then she couldn't get a ticket on a steamer until 4 months later, or if her steamer was somehow delayed for other reasons for more than 4 months, then the visa would become invalid and she would need to reapply. That concern was no doubt why the consulate mentioned the need for her to get the steamship ticket before they could approve any visa. But there were certainly other cases that we know of where some last-minute delay or change with the steamship company meant the invalidation of a person's visa. The letter adds another caveat too. It says quota visas, like the one that Sabina was applying for, were only issued when it appears reasonably certain that the person to whom such a visa is issued will be able to proceed to the United States within the validity of the visa, that's within the 4 months. So the letter makes it clear, no ticket, no visa. What initially might have looked like a pretty optimistic letter with the encouragement to purchase a steamship ticket turns out to be a letter clarifying that there's one more step needed before any visa can be offered. And here maybe I should back up and give you a sense of the other steps Sabina had already taken before she would have gotten to this point. As the Nazis had shifted to make it difficult for Germans to take any of their money with them when they left Germany, they'd also started to create what had become by 1941 a significant bureaucratic set of hurdles to emigration. After 1937, Jews needed these 12 different documents from German authorities to leave the country. And of course, it's not just filling out 12 forms. You need to just go get the forms, to pull together the needed information to complete each of the forms. Perhaps a visit somewhere for clarification of questions about the forms, and then submitting the forms. Maybe potentially there's a mistake in one of them. You have to get it back and then return it. And given the time pressures, problems with one form could lead you to need to redo some of the earlier forms. I think of my own challenges just renewing my driver's license, getting a new registration for a car. Down at the DMV, the challenges I face are pretty significant, I think. But here we're talking about getting 12 different documents. And then there was the American side of the bureaucracy. One of the classic books on American immigration policies during this period, written by David Wyman in 1968, was entitled Paper Walls, to suggest the bureaucratic barriers Americans put up. In addition to the 12 documents that Sabina Ghitman needed to get out of Germany, she also required 15 documents to get into America, including, down at the bottom, the last hurdle, proof of a booked passage on a steamship. The letter in our exhibition shows that Sabina had gotten through all the other hurdles and was down to this last one, but time ran out for Sabina. In July of 1941, just a few weeks after this letter was written, even though America and Germany were not at war, America closed its consulates in Nazi-controlled areas and ended the process of visa giving. Even though Sabina had jumped through 26 of the 27 hurdles, she'd not been able to get the final visa approved. 1 year later, the Nazis began rounding up the Jews of Belgium, including Sabina Ghitman, bringing them to the Mechlin transit camp that was established midway between Antwerp and Brussels in a former army facility called the Dossen Barracks. As more Jews were brought to the transit camp, those who had been detained earlier were deported to the east. Between August 4th, 1942 and the end of July 1944, a total of 28 trains left Mechlin for Poland, carrying 24,916 Jews. Most of them went to Auschwitz. The 14th transport of those 28 trains, which left Belgium on October 24th, 1942, and this is one of the documents that shows that, included Sabina Ghitman. The Germans recorded that she was originally born on March 14th, 1913 in Wandsbek, Germany, just outside of Hamburg. But they also termed her stateless, thanks to the Nuremberg laws that had removed German citizenship from Jews. They also noted that she was working as a saleswoman, a Verkäuferin. Whether she was killed immediately upon entering Auschwitz or was initially put to work, we don't know. We only know she did not survive the war. Dorothy Thompson, the journalist and radio broadcaster who interviewed Hitler in 1931 and was later the first journalist kicked out of Germany by the Nazis, wrote the following in 1938. It is a fantastic commentary on the inhumanity of our times that for thousands and thousands of people, a piece of paper with a stamp on it is the difference between life and death. The letter from the American consulate in Belgium about Sabina Ghitman, along with the other documents in our display, are reminders of how right Dorothy Thompson was. Sabina was missing one final paper with a stamp, but that omission was a death sentence for no other reason than she was Jewish. Okay, I will stop there. Let me once again thank Suzanne Germain for donating this letter and other materials to our museum and for sharing the story with me about her father, Max Goodman, and her aunt, Sabina Ghitman. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box and I'll try to answer them. Let me remind you also of some upcoming programs. Next Tuesday, we're offering the first of our 2 virtual guided tours of our museum, this one will be led by the Director of Education, Helen Turner. And next Wednesday, May 13th, I'll be back with another edition of our Curator's Corner to talk about some postcards that we have in our galleries from the Wołomin Ghetto in Poland. You can find, of course, a full list of our programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org under the Events tab. And please go to our website to make a donation to support a program like this. Okay, let me take a look and see what the questions are.